and said unto them, a penny, whose image and superscription hath it? They answered and said, Caesar's. And he said unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which be Caesar's, and unto God the things which be God's. And they could not take hold of his words before the people, and they marveled at his answer and held their peace. So again, here we have, they'd already predetermined that they wanted Jesus to be sentenced to death, but they wanted the Romans to do it. That's why they tried to trap him over the thing with Caesar, because they said, well, if we can trap him in that, then we can accuse him before Pilate or before Herod, and it didn't matter to them who they accused him to. Just we can take him to Pilate, or we can take him to Herod and accuse him and have this against him, and then he can be condemned to death that way. And then they could in their mind be innocent of his blood. And so we have here that they make a false accusation, which we know, we understand, they make this false accusation that they know is false. But again, they couldn't try Jesus on what they had convicted him of, because the Romans don't care. The Romans don't care that he made himself the Son of God. The Romans, they didn't care. That was not their religion. They didn't care. And so you're going to see that in John, when Jesus is talking to John and the Jews are accusing Jesus, and Jesus is talking in the book of John, to Pilate in the book of John, you're gonna see that Pilate's like, am I a Jew? Am I a Jew? And so, but anyway, so they had to accuse him of other things before the Roman court. And Pilate asked him, saying, Art thou the King of the Jews? And again, Jesus says, and he answered him and said, Thou sayest it. Now, again, as you read the different passages, you're going to see something that transpires a little bit differently in John. But he said, Are you the King of the Jews? And Jesus said, You're saying it. You're saying it. But in verse 4, then said Pilate to the chief priests and to the people, I find no fault in this man. Now you're going to see, we're going to get the context in John. We're going to get the context of that in John, that when they have that conversation, Jesus asked him a question. He asked him a question. He said, and I'm going to paraphrase because I'm not reading it right now, but he basically asked him, he said, Are you saying this of yourself, or did someone else tell you this of me? Now, again, they have accused him. They have accused him because he is the King of the Jews, because that is who he is, that basically him being the King of the Jews he was trying to take the place of Caesar, and he was going to overthrow Caesar. Now, the ironic thing is that had Jesus came in like that, and had he overthrown the Romans, the Pharisees and them would have been perfectly happy with them, Cody. They would have been perfectly happy, because they were under the Roman rule and they weren't happy. That's what they expected when Messiah came, that he was going to take over the government and set up his kingdom and rule. And had Jesus come in that way, instead of coming in as a lamb and coming in and not throwing off the Romans off of controlling the Jews, had he come in that way, they would have been happier with him than him coming in like he came in. And so, because when he came in, not only did he do good, but he also exposed them for who they were. And instead of just saying, taking over, and then them sliding into these positions as he's reigning over the Jews again, instead he came in and he didn't set up his kingdom the way they thought he was going to set up. He didn't set up a kingdom. He didn't throw out the Romans. He didn't throw out Caesar. He didn't throw out Pilate. He didn't throw out Herod. He didn't throw out those men. That's not how he came in. And so because of that, they rejected him as Messiah. And so they rejected him as Messiah, but now they're accusing him of doing something that he didn't do, but it was the thing that they wanted done. They were not happy being under Roman rule. They were not happy being under that. They were not thrilled with that, even though at this moment in time they were using the thing that was convenient. They were using that Roman rule to get Jesus crucified, because they could not kill Jesus on their own, because again they were under that the Roman authority. And so they said in verse 4, then said Pilate to the chief priests and to the people, I find no fault in this man. Now we're going to look at this, but over and over and over in this passage right here, Pilate goes to them over and over and over and says these words, I find no fault in this man. The things that you accuse him of, I've tried him, and I've questioned him, and I've examined him, and I've examined him thoroughly, and I find no fault. There's nothing that he's done that everything y'all are accusing him of, he's not done any of these things. Now, again, we talked about it last week. It's a shame that Pilate, and again, I understand that Jesus was going to the cross. I understand that. But it's a shame that here's Pilate, and he's tasked with this responsibility, and he had a choice to make. He had a choice to make of what to do with Christ. He had a choice to make of what to do with Christ. And in the end, whenever they said, if you let him go, you're not a friend of Caesar. Well, he already knew that Jesus was not trying to be king. He already knew that Jesus was not trying to overthrow the government. He understood that. And so yet, even those words, when they said those words, he could have said, look, guys, y'all falsely accused him. He probably is your king, as much as a Roman could understand. He probably is your king. He probably is the king of the Jews, but he's not trying to overthrow the Roman government here, so I'm going to let him go. He could have done that, Cody. He could have said it. And again, like I said, he still could have been crucified. He still could have been crucified, and yet Pilate could have truly been innocent of his blood. But yet he chose not to be. And just like we looked at last week, where he just washed his hands, I'm sorry, that doesn't make you innocent. You can tell someone, you can say all you want to, but like, hey, rob this bank. All right, guys, now listen, I don't have anything to do with y'all robbing this bank. I'm washing my hands of it. Well, guess what? You've already consented for them to go rob the bank, and you can wash your hands all you want to when they go rob the bank, and the police come, they start investigating and be like, hey, Cody's the one told us to rob the bank. Cody's the one said it. And Cody's like, no, I didn't do it. I washed my hands. I'm like, guys, I'm innocent of this. No, it doesn't work that way. And so, but here in verse number 5, it says, and they were the more fierce. So every time Pilate showed a little bit of weakness, the Jews just got that more vehement. Now, they didn't have anything, they really truly didn't have anything against Jesus, which we've looked at that. They didn't have anything against him. In John, Pilate's like, what do you accuse him of? And they're like, well, we wouldn't even brought him if he wasn't a malefactor, and which is an evildoer. They're like, we wouldn't even brought him. Just accept our word, he's a bad person. And so every time Pilate shows a little bit of like, guys, come on. And Pilate understood that they delivered him for envy. And Pilate shows a little bit of like, hey, I tell you what, he's probably innocent. Then they just get more fierce and more vehement. And I know a guy that he talks about his arguing strategy. It is even if he realizes he's being bested as far as like in his argument, he just gets louder and more obnoxious and just won't let the guy talk, and that will sometimes convince people just because he's more fierce and he's more aggressive and he's more and even though he knows he's wrong, he's still gonna argue. And so the Jews, they just got more fierce, saying, he stirreth up the people. Now, again, like I said, here's another false accusation. I mean, can y'all name a time that Jesus stirred up the people? Maybe stirred them up for good. Maybe stirred them up for good. Maybe stirred them up to look and say, hey, maybe what this man said is true. But he didn't stir up the people against the Romans. That's what he's being accused of, is stirring up the Jews to go against the Romans. That's what he's being accused of right here. He stirreth up the people, teaching throughout all Jewry, beginning from Galilee to this place. Now, again, Pilate realizes in verse number 6 that he's gotten out. When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked whether the man were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged unto Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod. Now, we don't get that in Matthew and Mark. We don't get this part right here. But so you see that Pilate's like, oh, this is great. I've got me an out. I've got me an opportunity. I've got me an opportunity to push this off on someone else and say, all right, I'm going to send him over here, and I'm going to send him to Herod. And if Herod condemns him to death, I can wash my hands and say, hey, look, I didn't find any fault in him, but apparently Herod knew something about him that I didn't know, and so because of that, I'm innocent. Pilate was continually looking for the opportunity to say that he was innocent. If you look in Acts chapter number 3, I'll just read that real quick. In Acts chapter number 3, flip back there. In verse number 12, Acts 3, verse number 12, Peter is talking right here. And it says, and when Peter saw it, he answered unto the people, ye men of Israel, why marvel ye at this? Or why look ye so earnestly on us, as though by our own power or holiness we had made this man to walk? The God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob, the God of our fathers, hath glorified his Son Jesus, whom ye delivered up and denied him in the presence of Pilate, when he was determined to let him go. But ye denied the Holy One and the just, and desired a murderer to be granted unto you, and killed the Prince of Life, whom God hath raised from the dead, whereof we are witnesses. So again, back in verse 13, and denied him in the presence of Pilate, when he was determined to let him go. So Pilate was determined. He was looking for an out, Brother Croft. And whenever he found out he was a Galilean, he's like, oh, wait a second here. I'm going to send him to Herod. So he sends him to Herod. And so in verse number 8. And I know I skipped right there at the end of verse 7, where Herod, who himself was also at Jerusalem at that time. And when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad. Now that just sounds, does it not sound strange? I mean, the things you hear of Herod, you're like, there's no way he's going to be glad at seeing Jesus. But if you look in Luke chapter 9, in verse number 9, in Luke 9, verse 9, it says, and Herod said, John have I beheaded, but who is this of whom I hear such things? And he desired to see him. And then if you, in Mark chapter number 6, we have another account. And we know that Herod was the one that tried to kill Jesus when he was born. Herod is also the one who ends up killing John the Baptist. But in Mark chapter number 6, verse number 20, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just man and holy, and observed him. And when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. Now this is Herod, who is going to he's the one who beheads John the Baptist. But even when Herod heard John the Baptist, all the way up to the point of when John the Baptist withstood him and said, it's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. It wasn't Herod's idea to behead John the Baptist. It was Herod's wife. Herod's wife is the one that said, this is what I want done. In Matthew chapter number 14, verse number 1, And at that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus and said on a service, "This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. For Herod had laid hold on John and bound him and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife." I'm not going to read the rest of that. But back to Luke right here. So you see in verse number 8, when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceeding glad. He's waited his whole life to see Jesus. He's waited his whole life to see. Here is this man that he's heard about, and he's heard about all these wonderful works that he's done, and we're not going to rehash all those wonderful works, but all those wonderful works that are being done in Herod's jurisdiction. I mean, you got to think, we'll look at it as the federal government. We got a guy in Resaca that sits out at the interstate. I think I told y'all that. And now, I mean, it'd take a 55-gallon trash bag to clean up all his trash because he sits on a bucket at the end of the interstate, Miss Jimmy. And now he just got to where he doesn't even clean up his mess. He just drinks his whatever drinks he's got. And so there's this mountain of trash behind him. And you think about the federal government, you think about all the money they spend on welfare and on, when I say Social Security, understand there are a lot of people on Social Security that don't need to be on Social Security. I was explaining that to my wife the other day about my dad had this guy that would come and work, and he would only work when he just needed money. And because he was on disability. Now, Brad, he was on disability for his back, but he was strong as an ox, and he was only about 5 foot tall, and he could take. And I can't say a pallet, so I say skid. So he'd take one of them skids that and you could stack them as high as you want. You go 15, 16 high. He could take them things and throw them up there. And I'm like, Dad, why is this guy on welfare? Why is he on welfare? And he also figured out the more kids you have, the more welfare you get. So he had a whole passel full of kids. And I'm like, why is this guy on welfare? He's perfectly fit to work. And it used to just drive me crazy, and I used to tell my dad I was going to turn him into defects all the time, or whoever. I'm like, I'm going to call on this guy. I'm going to wait till the next time I know he's working for you, and I'm going to call, and I'm going to have them come down there, and I'm going to get his Social Security taken away. That was 13-year-old me right there. But anyway, so I mean, the government. Can you imagine what the difference in the budget would be had the government not to pay all these people who are on welfare that don't need to be on welfare, all these people that go to the doctor. Again, we had a guy that was across the road from the church, and he was an addict. He was an addict, and Cody, so what he would do is he would hurt himself. And he would run down to the emergency room, and again, if I go to the emergency room, it's going to cost me like $250 right out of the pocket, and it's going to cost me like 50% on my wonderful insurance. But this guy could hurt himself, and he'd go down there, and he was never going to pay. And then they were going to prescribe him painkillers, and then he was going to go get his painkillers for free, and the government was going to pay for his painkillers, and then he was going to go back and he was going to get high on his painkillers. And Jesus, when Jesus walked on this earth, and once he started his earthly ministry, next thing you know, Herod's like, man, my budget's going down and down and down. Why? I've got more money now in the budget. Why? Because all these people that are out there asking alms and asking, to be taken care of, they don't have to be taken care of anymore. They don't have to be taken care of. All these sick people are not sick anymore. All these lame people are not lame anymore. They're not on the government expense. And I know it was different back then than it is, but you understand what I'm saying. So Herod's looking around, and he's like, hey, all these people don't have to be taken care of anymore. And he's like, I need to meet this man. I want to meet this man. I want to see this man. In verse number 8, he was exceeding glad, for he was desirous to see him of a long season. He had heard many things of him, and he hoped to have seen some miracle. Now we understand that Jesus, Jesus is going to the cross, and he's not here to play games. Again, he's not here to play games. I mean, had he been here to play games, had he been here to play Herod's game, had he been here to get himself off and not just declared innocent, but to be set free, Cody, he could have done anything. Herod could have brought anyone in. He could have brought anyone in that had whatever disease, and Jesus could have healed that person. And it almost appears that was his desire. He wanted to see a miracle. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us what miracle he asked. You know, it doesn't tell us what miracle he asked. And Jesus, he won't say a word. Then he questioned with him in many words. I mean, here again, this is the most famous person that Herod is ever going to meet. I know he, in his mind, Caesar would have been more, but he's talking to the Son of God. And he's heard about all these miracles that the Son of God has done. And he wanted to just see one for himself. And I already showed you that he was even happy to hear the preaching of John. It was he again, like I said, here's a man that was willing to listen. And yet Jesus answered not a word to Herod. He said nothing. Why? Because Jesus didn't want to be set free. He wanted to go to the cross. He wanted to go to the cross. And then in verse 10 it says, and the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. So here are the chief priests, and they're like following him around. Following Jesus wherever Jesus goes. Like, hey, we're gonna go down here and we're gonna make the accusation to Herod. And then they're gonna follow him back to Pilate. And yet it's funny, and we may have mentioned it last week, but yet they wouldn't go in because they didn't want to defile themselves because they wanted to eat the Passover. But yet here they are, and they're vehemently accusing Jesus, and he's not answering a word. When they were vehemently accusing him, Jesus is like, I'm not going to defend myself. In verse number 11, it says, and Herod with his men of war set him at naught. They made out as he was nothing. They made out it like he really, when they set him at naught, they're like, this guy isn't anything. This guy isn't who he said he was. He's not anything. He's nothing. And so they mocked him and arrayed him in a gorgeous robe. They're like, oh, they made fun of him. Like, oh, King of the Jews? Okay, sure, you're King of the Jews. Here, we'll put this gorgeous robe on you. And they mocked him and they made fun of him. And how many times since Jesus was arrested has he been mocked and made fun of and abused physically and mentally, and they would spit on him and they just done all kinds of terrible things to Jesus. And they mock him, and they put that robe on him. They send him back to Pilate. In verse number 12, in that same day, Pilate and Herod were made friends together, for before they were at enmity between themselves. And Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests and rulers of the people, in verse 14, said unto them, Ye have brought this man unto me as one that perverteth the people. Behold, I have examined him before you, have found no fault in this man touching those things whereof you accuse him. Again, like I said, I talked about it, how that they didn't care. They didn't care that he was innocent. They didn't care that they had to use false accusations. They didn't care that they had to change the accusation that they convicted him of to get him convicted in front of Pilate and in front of Herod. They did not care. And here is Pilate saying, I have examined him of the things that you accuse him of, and I find no fault in him. There's nothing that he's done. There's nothing that he said. There's nothing that he's ever done or ever said to make me believe the things that you're accusing him of. Then he goes further. He says in verse 15, no, nor yet Herod, for I sent you to him, and lo, no thing worthy of death is done unto him. So he's like, look, now not only did I try him, but we sent him to Herod, and even though Herod mocked him, even though Herod set him at naught, even though Herod put a gorgeous robe on him, even though he done all those things, when he sent him back to me, he's like, all these things they're accusing him of, I don't see any of it. I don't see any of it. This is an innocent man. So in verse 16, I will therefore chastise him and release him. With that, we live in the United States, and according to Trey Gowdy, like I said, I've told you all this, but according to Trey Gowdy, our justice system is set up. It's supposed to be set up. Number one, the blind lady with the scales and everything. But our justice system is supposed to be set up where you're more likely to set a guilty man free than to ever convict an innocent man. That's how our justice system is supposed to be set up. And here are these chief priests and these rulers, and they're violating God's law in making false accusations against the Son of God, and now they've taken him to a Roman court, and they've asked to have him slain, and Pilate and Herod both say, hey, we both looked at him, we both examined him, and I find no fault in him. There's nothing that he's done that y'all are accusing him of. He's not done any of this. And in verse 16, it says, I will therefore chastise him and release him. Again, I don't even understand that. I don't understand that, Brother Parks. If you think of just even with your kids, even with your own children, if your own children are accused of something, if they're accused of something, and you examine them and you're like, well, they didn't do it. Well, guess what, Cody? I'm not going to spank my kid if someone says, hey, your son done this. If he did it, then yeah, he's going to get it. But if he didn't do it, I'm not going to be like, all right, now look. So you said he did this. I've checked it out. He hasn't done it. But will it make you feel better if I just beat him anyway? Because really that's what you want. Will it make you feel better if I just bust his tail right here in public, right in front of everyone, and then even though he's perfectly innocent? That's absurd. You wouldn't do that to your own child. You wouldn't do that. And so I don't understand why Pilate has examined Christ. And we're going to see in John, it was a much deeper conversation with Pilate. Herod didn't get anything out of him, but it was a much deeper conversation with Pilate. But here he's examined him, and now he's like, look, I'm going to chastise him. You brought him to me. If it'll make you feel better, he didn't violate anything in the Roman law. Apparently you think he violated something in the Jewish law, and so I'm going to chastise him and then let him go. And they cried out all at once, saying, away with this man. They wasn't having any of it. Release unto us Barabbas, who for sedition made in the city, and for murder was cast into prison. Pilate, therefore, willing to release Jesus. Again, like I said, we read it in Acts, where Peter said that Pilate was determined. He was determined to let him go. Obviously, he wasn't determined enough, but he was determined to let him go. Pilate, therefore, willing to release Jesus, spake again to them. But they cried, saying, crucify him, crucify him. And he said unto them the third time, why? Again, Pilate marveled. He marveled. He marveled at what was going on here. It was obviously, it was above him. It was out of his control for the most part. It was above him. Jesus was going to the cross. And here Pilate is marveling. He's like, I don't understand. I don't understand how this man is not defending himself. I don't understand why he won't defend himself. I don't understand why, except for envy, that these people hate him so much. I don't understand that these people in the crowd that not too long ago were shouting Hosanna, Hosanna when he come into Jerusalem are now so stirred up that now they're shouting crucify him. Pilate did not understand. And he marveled and he said, why? What evil hath he done? I have found no cause of death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go. And they were instant. They didn't hesitate. They never paused for a moment, Brother Parks. I'm going to use a worldly reference here, but I listen to old time radio. I listen to old time radio all the time. I got an app on my phone, and I listen to old time radio. I listen to old time radio when I go to sleep at night. Thankfully, my wife said the greatest invention ever was AirPods, because I have to listen to it with an AirPod because she doesn't like hearing it. But I listen to it, Brother Wayne. A lot of times I listen to it when I'm driving. I listen to old time radio all the time. And there was a time where they'd stirred up a mob, and the mob was coming to take someone, and the guy stopped the mob. And when he stopped the mob and the mob dispersed, the person's like, well, they're just going to do it again. And the guy's like, no, well, probably not. Probably not, because it's hard to build up that much energy. It's hard to build up that much, more than once. And so it probably won't happen again. And all these people were so stirred up, but there was no taking the temperature down. Again, I mean, you had him before Pilate, and then he went to Herod, and then come back, and you'd have thought they could have taken the temperature down. And probably once you get to the book of Acts, and as the apostles are preaching, and these people didn't appreciate the fact that they were accused of having Jesus' blood on their hands, but they volunteered for it before Pilate. They said, when Pilate washed his hands, he said, I'm innocent. They said, his blood will be on us and on our children. But in the book of Acts, they're like, hey, wait a second, you're putting his blood on us. Well, yeah, because you said it'll be on us and on our children. And they were instant with loud voices, requiring that he might be crucified. Now, again, there was a question asked. Why? What evil hath he done? There was a question asked. The question was, what evil hath he done? There was no answer to that, Cody. The only answer was, kill him. Crucify him. Crucify him. That was their only answer. There was no true response. There was no new accusation. There was no, oh, okay, well, you're going to let him go. Well, by the way, not only is he of this, if you think he's of that, we've got this other evidence against him. There was never any evidence against him. There was never anything. And so they just had this crowd stirred up. And this crowd's like, they didn't answer. Pilate asked a question. The question was, why? What evil hath he done? Their answer was, crucify him. Requiring they might, and the voices of them and of the chief priests prevailed. Verse 24, Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they required. And he released unto him that for sedition and murder was cast into prison, whom they desired, but he delivered Jesus to their will. He said, all right, you can have him. You can have Barabbas. You can have this person who was guilty of sedition. They accused Jesus of being guilty of it, and he wasn't. You can have Barabbas, who's a murderer. You can have him. I'll release him to you. And in Pilate's mind, he's like, he's going to do it again. He's going to stir up people again. He's going to do it again, and I'm just going to have to deal with Barabbas again later. And this guy's a murderer, and he's probably going to kill another, he's going to kill someone else. But yet, that's who they're asking for, and it was their right to choose. And he delivers Jesus to be crucified at their will. Their will. It wasn't Pilate's will. We've established that over and over. It wasn't Pilate's will. It was their will. It was their will to have Jesus crucified. It was their will to have him slain on the cross. Had it been lawful, they would have stoned him. Had it been lawful, they would have stoned him, but it wasn't lawful. And so they took him to Pilate and wanted him crucified. And they thought in crucifying Jesus, they thought that would be the end. They thought that would be the end. They thought if we crucify him, cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. They thought if we put him on a tree, everyone, if he's crucified in a Roman, by the Romans, if he's crucified by the Romans, and they have to put the accusation of whatever they're being crucified for over their head, if they see that, then all these people that have turned away from us will turn back to us and say we were wrong. That's what they thought, Brother Jay. They thought that they were getting what they wanted. They thought, Brother Parks, that they were getting what they wanted. They thought that this was going to be the end. They thought this was going to be the end. This was just the beginning. This was just the beginning. Jesus told Nicodemus all the way back in John chapter 3, Jesus told Nicodemus that he would be lifted up. And he would draw all men unto him. And so Nicodemus understood that this was playing right into what Jesus came to do. Even the disciples, didn't understand completely what was going on. They didn't understand. But yet, here they are. They think this is the end. This is it. This is going to finish him. Once he sentences him to death, and we get him on the cross, and once he's dead on that cross, we are done with him. That's what they thought. But they were dealing with the Son of God. They were dealing with the Son of God. They were dealing with God's Son. They were dealing with Jesus who was never going to stay dead. He was never going to stay in that grave. He was never going to stay dead. And they had no true understanding that they were doing exactly what God wanted them to do. I know it sounds terrible. God wanted them to kill him. Jesus came to be crucified. He came to be crucified. And because he came to be crucified, someone had to make the accusations. Someone had to make those accusations. And it was their will. It was their will. Again, we understand that he was delivered for enemy. We understand all those things. But at the end of the day, it was not only their will, it was God's will that Jesus was going to that cross. Thank you.